have talked extensively about IPM, at least I think we have, in my opinion. We talk about integrated pest management when we talk about our insects. We talked about integrated weed management when we talk about our weeds. We're now talking about disease or plant pathology, so we'll talk about integrated disease management. I think some of you or most of you would probably be able to get this lecture without me giving it, but I think it serves as a good recap. And I, in years past, considered the integrated pest management as one portion of the class. Now I'm integrating it into each section. So I'm kind of doing this a little bit off cuff, not entirely, but I'm not going to follow a guide exactly. So there's going to be pieces of this that you're going to say, she forgot about that, or maybe we should talk about this. So that's going to be part of our lecture. This is meant to kind of get us going as we do this remote delivery thing. And then when we meet today on Canvas, or Tuesday on Canvas, I might upload this tonight, we will talk further and fill in any blanks that might be missing. Okay? So, integrated disease management. And we already talked about the disease triangle. So I don't think I need to go into that again. We also discussed some different perspectives on that disease triangle, which I think are viable and important to understand that there's a lot of different ways we can look at this. All right, so what are the steps of an IDM plan, essentially? And what would be number one? You guys can kind of do this as we go along, thinking in your own brain, what is number one? Prevention, right? Prevention is always going to be number one, and we talk about prevention often gets lumped into cultural controls, which is not exactly the next step, but it's part of the next step. So in this prevention piece, what we're doing is first of all, we need to understand our crop and the potential diseases, right? Otherwise, we're just kind of, throwing it all out there, but we're going to take a different approach. We're going to take a more diligent approach, more intentional approach, I should say, and we're going to try to understand what kind of diseases we are going to look for. And with that, then we look at this disease triangle, right? And I told you guys we'd see it more than once, so here it is again. So in the disease triangle, we have our plant pathogen, we have our susceptible host, and we have the conducive environment. And we have to have all three of these in order to have the disease, right? So, when we're thinking about what is our crop, what is our bread and butter, what are we going to make our money on, how are we going to be successful farmers, we want to understand what kind of diseases do we need to be aware of, and be aware of what environment these diseases are going to thrive in, knowing you can do a little bit of forecasting and kind of not necessarily predict, but understand what might be in your future essentially as a farmer. And sometimes that future is just 24 hours away. Sometimes it's a little bit further. Understanding our overall climate essentially. And then obviously you have to have a susceptible host, and there's ways to get around having a susceptible host. The plant pathogen you may or may not have. You may not know whether or not you have. You might have just bought this farm and you're not aware of what's all there. And it can also lay dormant for years and years and years and years. So it's not necessarily there, and it's not necessarily not there. So part of prevention is what? Scouting. So you want to scout your plants. So in addition to understanding, you want to take time to scout. And I think I've mentioned this before, it's good to have the same day every Monday, every Friday, every Monday and Friday. If you're dealing with diseases that like the humidity and it's a very humid part of the year or a humid couple of days, maybe you're out there every day. But having a regular day to scout your plants is going to be important. If you're in the greenhouse, you may want to have every Monday and every Thursday because the greenhouse environment can go one of two ways. You know, we're able to control that environment, but at the same time, we might have a disease that comes on very quickly. So scouting, understanding, and then just part of prevention, which we've already mentioned, is clean tools, clean seeds. And I mean, you know, seeds from a reputable source, clean plant parts. You know, if you're buying potato tubers, you want to make sure they're certified disease-free potato tubers, or garlic, onion sets. What else? How else can we prevent? Also along the line of cleaning is cleaning ourselves. Boots and clothing. Obviously back to the tools, we would also include machinery. And what else do we do in order to prevent? This is where I say we might have some gaps. So we can talk about the gaps. So then right alongside prevention is the very next, and that is cultural controls. So sometimes these are intermingled, but cultural controls would include some things that will reduce the susceptible host, and that would be planting resistant cultivars. That is what are resistant? Cultivated varieties. You know, just like the good example is the downy mildew of basil. We're planting a variety that's resistant to downy mildew. What else? Big one, cover crops. Cover cropping, let's say. So you work a regular cover cropping into your field plan. What else? Cover crops and starts with a C. Crop rotation. Another big one. And these two, especially crop rotation. I mean, crop rotation is just one of those things that it's kind of like we just do it because it's almost, you know, that's where again it falls in the line with prevention, right? Because we are acting to prevent it by crop rotating. Because if you're crop rotating and you've got, you know, your field, and a really simple crop rotation, you're growing corn and you're growing kale and you're growing, let's grow popcorn, that sounds more fun. And you're growing kale and you're growing tomatoes. because we live in Jersey, and you're growing, what else? Pumpkins, because I want to grow pumpkins. So then the next year, obviously, you don't plant corn in the same place. You're going to rotate, you know? And you can have a very simple rotation. I mean, to be honest, these are all from different families. And if you want to go with the most simple crop rotation, you just rotate families. You know, pumpkins are in the cucurbit family. Corn is in the Poaceae. Kale is a brassica, and tomato is a Solanaceae. So just not planting the same family. I know when I first got into this career and I was trying to learn more about vegetable gardening, because I started out in ornamental horticulture and I wanted to learn more about vegetables, I was like, how do I cover or crop rotate, you know? What goes after what? There's got to be a prescription. And sure, there probably is, but you don't have to make it too difficult. Let's see, what else in the prevention, or I'm sorry, cultural control, which again falls into prevention. So we're planting resistant varieties to get rid of the susceptible host. We are cover cropping in order to suppress diseases, and we are crop rotating to remove, you know, potentially remove the plant pathogen, right? Because if something affects the corn, it's not likely to affect pumpkins. There are a few exceptions to that, where there's certain fungal diseases that are more broad spectrum, but generally speaking, the diseases that we're dealing with are going to be very specific to the crops we're dealing with. So what else? Planting resistant varieties, cover cropping, crop rotation. Oh, I know there's more. There's one huge one, really big, massive, gigantic, huge. If you live in New Jersey, it's huge. This is one we're just really focusing on more now. Plant health. So this is so big. This is so big, and it's getting bigger, and it actually makes the most sense, and yet it seems to be very much overlooked. Plant health is huge in prevention, and I would consider it a cultural control. And actually, I'm getting rid of this word. Management. We're managing stuff, we're not controlling anything. Sorry to say, but there's a whole other thing that's happening out there. It's called Mother Earth, nature, dynamic, soil life, organisms. Yeah, we're not in control. We're managing. We can be good managers. So plant health. So watering, or water management. Nutrition, big, nutrition. Or nutrient management, we should call it. What else? I know some of you are saying it, and you're maybe even writing it down. Soil health. Another part of this, which is, you know, stems from my ornamental horticulture, is right plant, right place. And what does that mean? Actually, I added, this is my own little addition. So maybe I can be famous in this industry someday. No, I'm joking. I don't really care to be famous. Right plant, right place, right place. So what do I mean by that? So in the horticulture, in horticulture, in ornamental world, this would be, I'm not going to plant a hosta in the blazing sun, okay? Because hostas like shade. So this can fall into agriculture as well. because there are certain crops that like certain soils, and that might be more important. There are certain crops that like certain environments. I mean, one thing that is interesting but true, and I'm still wrapping my brain around it, is that, you know, strawberries actually are native to forests. So, and so there's also the coastal strawberries, but they don't have much taste to them. But at any rate, the strawberry is actually a forest plant. So when we are growing it out in the blazing sun with absolutely no other plant cover underneath plastic after we fumigated the soil, is it a surprise that in 2 and 3 years after we plant them, they are dealing with fungal disease? Not really. So right plant, right place. And what I mean by right place, my own fun little addition, is spacing. Let's call it spacing. Space could be something totally different. So spacing, what do I mean by that? I mean giving your plants space so that the airflow can happen in between them, making sure that they're not, you know, right on top of each other, and in different plants are going to respond differently to the need for space. Like tomatoes, they like a fair amount of space. Broccoli actually likes a fair amount of space. I learned the hard way, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I learned the hard way. I was like all about I learned a lot of things the hard way, but I was all about companion planting one year, and I was like, yeah, this is the way to go. I'm companion planting. These guys like each other. So I was planting plants with each other, and you know, basil and tomatoes, they really like each other, right? They don't like each other that much, because then they both get diseased because there's no space traveling. So just like with people, we kind of need our space. And maybe not too much space. I'm getting too much space right now with the whole, you know, coronavirus, but that's okay, we'll survive. All right, so right plant, right place, right place. And then just to go back to the soil health for a second, because this is obviously another conversation that's much bigger, is soil health is absolutely tied directly to nutrition, because in the soil we are creating an environment for the biology of the soil, so soil biology. And I'm going to put a smiley face there, because that's the bomb. Diggity, diggity, dig, dig, dig. Okay, so that's prevention. Those are cultural management. Again, tomorrow, whenever we do this, December 1st, we will fill in the blanks. So maybe there's some things I'm missing. Make note as you're going through this on what I'm missing. So to me, these are no-brainers. These are things that you want to do. These are things that you're going to do no matter what. So then, what's next in a IPM plan are the other managements. So we have mechanical. And mechanical may also be physical. That might be an and or. And then lastly is, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not last. Next is biological. And lastly is chemical. All right. So these are kind of our steps. First, we're going to try to prevent it. Part of our prevention is going to be cultural management techniques. Because you don't need to understand your crop or your diseases to go ahead and implement these things. Like, why not? I mean, here, actually, I take that back. This would be an understand your crop and understand your disease notion. Otherwise, you're not doing any harm. You're only going to improve your overall health of your farm or your garden by practicing these. So mechanical, physical, biological, and chemical. Like, when do we do that? And how do we know when to do that? All right? So This is where we have a totally, do we have a plan, okay? Do we have a plan? I'll come back to that. All right, so what are some mechanical or physical, and I'm gonna call these management strategies. I'm getting away from that word. Control. So when will we do the mechanical or physical? Well, I do that automatically. I actually consider that the very basic mechanical happens when you're scouting. Because when you're scouting, if you're going through your tomato field and you're scouting for late blight and you see some late blight, are you just gonna leave it there? No. You're gonna cut it off with your pruners, and that's gonna be physical control. So that is removal of diseased plant parts. What are you gonna do after you cut that plant part off? I think I heard somebody say it, you're going to clean your pruners, right? Or your tool. Another way is you're dealing with, let's say you've got a wilt and it's in your cucumber patch, and you come across some type of wilt. You're gonna remove the entire plant. And the recommendation with both of these diseased parts or the entire plant is basically to bag it and dispose of it or burn it. I guess I'm more inclined to burn it just because I don't like the idea of putting it in the landfill, but those are your options on that, or at least those are the recommendations. So what are some other physical management strategies? I kind of feel like that's it. Again, I might be missing something here. All right, you'll let me know if I'm missing something. So then we have an option to, okay, I'm gonna go back to mechanical and physical, because here's another option here. So I just mentioned the fact that you could fumigate the soil. So that is chemical. However, there are potentially ways to solarize the field, and that could potentially help minimize disease, pathogen, or inoculum. I don't know how effective that would be. I actually think the more effective thing would be to add a cover crop or crop rotate rather than to leave that land fallow. So yeah, I'll take that back. Just a thought though. All right, so then we have the option of biological, okay? So when we talked about insects, we had a lot of options for biological controls, which is fun because that's like your, lady beetles and your lacewings and your praying mantids, and I mean, those are some cool bugs. But what about, and then we didn't have a whole lot of options for the weeds except for the goats, right? So biological controls for weeds is a little limited. There's some others out there that are actually working, but just overall in general. Biological controls for plant pathogens is more and more an option for us as growers. This is an area I think we're gonna see more and more development occurring and happening in order to get our plant in order, and these biological controls are good fungus and good bacteria. And these things are directly related to, which is related to, and if your plants are healthy, you're gonna deal with a lot less disease. And there's a lot of people out there, a lot of, not just people, I mean, there are people, yes, but there's a lot of professionals in our field who are making a claim, and it's not just a claim because it seems to be true, it's science-based and backed and proven that when your plants are of their fullest potential, and when they are as healthy as they can be, which is not an easy chore, don't get me wrong, but when they are of the best health that they can be, they are resistant to disease, and you've eliminated a susceptible host. You've eliminated a susceptible host without the need of buying a cultivated variety that's been bred to be resistant. This conversation gets much deeper. We're not gonna go there right now, but I like that conversation a lot. So these are the things that are gonna be more and more, in my opinion, we will be applying more and more good fungus and good bacteria to basically combat those diseases. And actually, I'm just thinking of something right now. Really, to be honest, cover cropping actually should be considered a biological control. Because a biological control is any living thing that is managing the disease. So actually, cover cropping falls under two different categories, in my opinion: cultural management and biological management or control. I almost feel like I don't know how to get rid of the control on that one. Because there are certain cover crops that are suppressing the disease. It's not just a matter of, changing it up for diversity. Which would actually be a part of cultural management, diverse crops. But it's, that's an interesting thought I'm just having for the first time. Okay, so then chemical control. So we've talked about chemical control a little bit in our discussions, and I think I went through some PowerPoint, well, I know I did, went through some PowerPoints and mentioned a couple of instances where chemicals don't work at all. Once you get the disease, you've got the disease, so then it just becomes about managing the disease. So in some cases, the chemical control has to be what we call prophylactic. It has to be preventative. You have to apply the chemical with the idea in mind. And it's not just an idea, obviously, because you're smarter than that. It's a strategy, essentially, to prevent. So in a way, the chemicals in plant pathogen world are largely preventative. And that becomes part of this forecasting, which I should have had in here somewhere. And the idea with forecasting is you're looking at your weather, you understand your crop and you understand your disease, and you're looking at your weather and you're like, wow, okay, I'm gonna be dealing with 99% humidity for the next 3 days. And nights. I mean, that's when it's really bad, is when it's like high percent humidity at night in addition to the day. So like there's no break in that humid state. So you're looking at the forecast and you're saying, whoa, and obviously we live where we live, so we kind of have an idea of when it's going to be more humid than other times of the year, although it's not always predictable at this time. But at any rate, forecasting is going to help you decide, when do I apply the prophylactic chemical. And then, as we know, with our IPM, we start with softer chemicals and work our way to the harder chemicals. And that would be like, basically when I say softer chemicals, I'm thinking of the organic choices. Neem oil always comes to mind as a big choice, because neem oil is one of those, it's naturally derived from the neem tree, and it is both preventative or prophylactic, and it has somewhat of an effect beyond that. So it's if you are scouting your fields and you see that you have a particular disease that can be managed with neem oil, it's not too late. You know what I mean? So there's certain diseases, like for instance, the tomato mosaic virus. Once you have the virus, you gotta bag those plants, pull them out, bag those plants, get rid of them, burn them, I guess. Like I said, I haven't done that, but I guess I would. So anyway, it's time to remove those plants completely. If you're dealing with a fungal issue, it may not be too late to add neem oil, like say you're just noticing the beginning stages. I would still remove the plant part, absolutely, and I would remove any plants in entirety if they are affected more than a certain percent. That can be up to you as the grower, and we'll talk about that. But at any rate, neem oil does have some fungicidal effects. So most of our chemicals are fungicides. There are some, because there's nothing for the viruses. There's nothing that we have. There's no chemical control. I'm just thinking of bacterial issues. I would have to look into that. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow. But most of what we're dealing with is fungicides. And fungicides are very hard on your soil biology. So use them with great caution and only when necessary. And this goes back to that conversation that we had in our weeds portion about, only spray when it pays. So you really have to think about that, because it's not just a matter of I'm spending money on this chemical and I'm spending money to spray. It's also a matter of, is it worth it to spray and jeopardize something that you've been investing in? Also, is it worth it depending on how far along the disease has gotten in the field or the crop or the plant? And how much is that crop or plant worth? What's your return, and is it worth it? So how do we know? So this looks like an IPM plan, right? Looks pretty good, but there's something missing. Something really big missing here. What is it? I think some of you probably are saying it right now. Let's hope I spell it right. Threshold. Yeah, let's write a great big word and spell it wrong. And with this threshold, we usually call it economic injury threshold. And we're talking about disease. And this again, and I've mentioned it before with your thresholds, it's kind of up to you. It's up to you as a grower, but it's also up to you as far as how much does your crop yield, and meaning how much does it economically yield you. What kind of disease is it? In some cases, it could be something that has to be managed with a 0% threshold. And then also something else to consider is your time and energy and labor and everything else involved. So without that threshold, you really don't have a plan. You just have a lot of things to consider. Although having these steps in place is somewhat of a plan, right? But having that threshold and understanding, like, if I see a certain number of diseased plant parts, it's time to consider a biological control. And there's other things that we can do, and it becomes a bigger conversation, but and I almost feel like this would be considered a biological control, but there's other things we can do to increase our plants' resistance to disease. And that, again, like I said, it becomes a bigger conversation, but just for instance, I used to make, and I think some of you know this already, but I used to make a tea, maybe I already talked about this, because one of my favorite plants in the whole world is horsetail and equisetum, and equisetum is full of silica. It's just like amazing plant. I used to make a tea with silica, or I'm sorry, equisetum, and then I would also add stinging nettle, which has some other beneficial properties, and then I would literally spray it as a foliar application to the plant, and I did that at the first sign of late blight on tomatoes. It was, in my opinion, a biological control to some degree, or management, definitely management, not controlling that, but the other option is there are certain nutrients we could apply as a foliar spray. So again, that becomes a bigger conversation, a bigger topic, and something that you'll learn a lot more as you go along. And because I want to say, like, back in the day, didn't they spray milk on plants to prevent things from growing? I mean, part of that thought process and theory, and it really actually worked. We should actually look that up about spraying milk, because I think that was an old school thing. But part of that thought or that notion is that you're applying a layer of something that's going to help prevent, in the instance of late blight, it's going to prevent that fungal spore from even being able to penetrate the cuticle of the plant, and get that establishment, what we would call the infection, the ability to infect the plant. Which just gave me another thought. There's another application, and it would be considered, I don't know if it'd be considered chemical because it's not a chemical, but another thought, it actually falls under prevention, to be honest, is, and this is something maybe you want to look into, is kaolinite clay. Something you would probably benefit to understand how it works. So it's a clay, it's a soil particle, or a part of the soil and profile in some places. I don't think I spelled that right. Kaolinite. Maybe there's another O. But at any rate, this is a clay that you can literally spray on your plants. People do this more often for fruit trees. It also helps with bugs, insects, because basically what happens is you're covering this. I always did it for seedlings. I did it for seedlings. What did I do? Mostly cucurbids. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. And what it does is it basically creates this coating, as you can imagine. It's like a white coating or a pale coating, and the insects have a hard time penetrating. And what they actually will do half the time, especially if the clay is in that first few hours and early stage of applying the clay, they'll literally like put their little insect feet on it and then be like, what? And then they spend all this time like licking themselves and cleaning themselves as opposed to infecting the plant. But that would work the same for the way that the fungal spores or the fungal hyphae want to infect the plant. So it helps prevent that ability to infect. I feel like it also helps with sun scald. So if you're planting on a really, really hot day and you can't avoid it, this will help prevent sun scald. So there's a lot of good reasons to use this. It's available. I can't remember how expensive it is, but I'll tell you, I bought some. Actually, no, I didn't even buy it. I worked at the garden I worked at for 6 years, and I still used the clay from the previous gardener because you just don't use that much. In my case, I mean, I'm small vegetable farm or small vegetable garden for a 10,000 square feet vegetable garden, not a farm. But it could be worth it. All right, So I think that kind of covers it to some degree. I hope you can see that. I think you can. I mean, I should have drew my little triangle bigger. I hope you followed my amazingly organized lecture, because that's just the way it works. And if we had class in class, you'd see this every Tuesday. So now you just get to see it once in a while, or once. Because I don't think it was that crazy last time I did a recording. But at any rate, keep your questions handy, and anything that you think that I missed, and let's talk more about it when we talk. All right?